The second and last of the a priori arguments for atheism or against the existence of this Judeo-Christian monotheistic deity is commonly known as the Euthyphro argument, and Russell uses it in his article, and I'll quote from him extensively and then talk about the argument and its significance. God cannot be a source of moral facts. Is that difference between moral and immoral due to God's fiat, or is it not? If it is due to God's fiat, then for God himself there is no difference between right and wrong, and it is no longer a significant statement to say that God is good. If you are going to say, as theologians do, that God is good, you must then say that right and wrong have some meaning which is independent of God's fiat, because God's fiats are good and not bad, independently of the mere fact that he made them. So this argument is a version of the argument that we find in Plato when he talks about religious piety in the Euthyphro. And the idea here is that there's a dilemma, that there are two possible ways of understanding the source of moral authority for ethical or moral facts. Neither one looks satisfying, neither one looks good, and hence it's a dilemma. And so the idea is pretty straightforward. Right? So what is the source of the authority of moral commands within religion? Well, if it's because your God wills them, then their authority is linked to his will. And, of course, that means that they have no reality independent of what your deity wills. And that being the case, it looks kind of arbitrary what counts as good and what counts as wrong or bad. Your deity can say murder is a sin, and then say, oh, murder's a sin except on Tuesday, or murder's no longer a sin. I've changed my mind about that. And in each case, that suddenly becomes the moral fact. That becomes the way things are. And this seems completely arbitrary. In effect, what you're saying is what's moral or immoral or good or bad is just whatever God says. And what's the authority there? Well, the authority looks like it's kind of a carrot or a stick. Obey God, get a carrot. Disobey God, and get a stick. Is there any objective reason for why God wills one thing over another? Apparently not. It's all due to God's will. And this makes moral authority linked to religious doctrine look very arbitrary and undesirable. Hence, one aspect of our dilemma, one horn of our dilemma. Well, what's the other horn of our dilemma? Well, suppose we say, yeah, that doesn't sound right. So God wills things, but God wills things in accordance with an objective reality. So what counts as good or bad is willed by God, but in accordance with the objective reality of what makes something good or makes something bad. So that their being good or bad isn't dependent upon God's will, but rather is a reality independent of what God wills. And God's will may be consistent with it, but it isn't God's will that makes an act good or bad. But this is undesirable in the context of religion, because now religion doesn't provide you with the source of moral authority. The source of moral authority is independent of God's will, hence independent of God. And so for this reason, that horn doesn't look very acceptable for the religious theologian or philosopher of religion either. And so neither possibility, good and bad dependent upon God's will, good or bad independent of God's will, neither one looks like a desirable view within the context of religious doctrine, because neither one seems to allow for religion to be the source of moral authority. Moral authority either looks non-existent or arbitrary in the first horn, or it looks like it is something that isn't dependent upon God or God's will, and hence really isn't something to be found in religion or religious teaching, but something objective. Now, this is very important historically. For one reason, it's oftentimes thought that atheists can't be moral. So, for instance, when John Locke wrote his letter concerning toleration, he urged that we all exhibit toleration towards each other's religious beliefs, because no one can be certain the exact nature of the deity. But he ends this letter urging tolerance amongst religious convictions with a statement saying, well, except for atheists. And so the idea here is that atheists somehow, they can't, because they don't believe in God, they can't be constrained by the normative ethical standards that religious belief advocates. But if religious belief isn't the source of moral authority, then the atheist, as well as the religious person, is capable of recognizing the objective reality of moral normativity, of things being right or wrong, regardless of their religious convictions one way or the other.